How I got our translator fired. I was working a job that had me operating in one of our offices overseas. We would have business expenses, and those receipts would be in the language of the country we were in, obviously. Those expenses were for things like printer ink, office equipment, cleaning services, marketing costs, all pretty standard stuff. Well, around this time we got a new VP over our region who worked out of head office in LA. This VP came up with this brilliant idea to hire a translator to translate all of receipts to make sure we weren't sneaking in bullspeak. Fair enough. However, the issue that arose was that we had to send our expenses to the translator who would translate the receipt then submit for reimbursement. The problem was this translator was a real Karen type. She would demand better scans of the receipts, oftentimes after we had already thrown it away. She would argue if we really got the best deal on whatever we bought. I remember in one transaction on about 200 of ink cartridges she asked me why I didn't order online from this common website. To which I said they were out of stock at the time, and we needed the ink so we bought from a local store. To which she said I was spending too much money. To which I said it's none of your concern. Your job is to translate the receipt. To which she said if I want her to submit my expenses I need to be nice to her. To which I said she needs to learn her place, she's a translator not a VP that gets to instruct me what to do. After this encounter she started being extra anal with my expenses, so one day I came in the office early to call her and try and work things out. She basically told me that I screwed up by pissing her off, and she expected my expense reports to be perfect or she wouldn't submit them unless they were. I told her if she keeps this up she won't have a job much longer. She laughed and wished me well and hung up. A few months later we had our annual meeting in LA, and after the meeting we were at a bar and I walked up to our VP and started up a conversation. I steered the conversation to expenses and I asked him how much in monthly expenses did he typically reimburse us for in the country we worked out of. He said about $300 to $400. I acted surprised and asked, is that all? He goes, yay. To clarify, that $300 to $400 is the typical spend. And he says it rarely gets above $400. So I ask him about how Karen, our translator, is doing. He says she's doing a good job and I nod my head and I go, how much fraudulent expenses has she caught? It's important to note, every employee that was submitting expenses was well paid. They'd be awfully stupid trying to skim some extra dollars via fraudulent expense reports. He goes, what do you mean? I said, well, you hired her to ensure all the expenses you were reimbursing us for are legitimate, right? Her job is to translate them for you, correct? He says it is. And I ask, so is it safe to presume you've done that to ensure people aren't submitting BS expenses? He says you could say that. I smile and ask, so how much in fraudulent expenses has she caught? He thinks for a moment and goes, I don't think she has caught any. So I ask, and how much do we pay her? He says it depends on her workload, but between $2,500 to $300 a month. I smile and ask, does it make sense to pay someone $300 a month to translate $300 in receipts? Well, she ensures we aren't getting fraudulent expenses, and I counter, well, you said she hasn't counted any in the last 9 months, and the expenses are always between $300 to $400, so as long as the expenses stay in that range, wouldn't it be safe to assume that the expenses are legitimate? And couldn't you bring on a translator on a contract basis if they get out of hand? He sees my point. And imagine the cost savings. We would probably save over $40 a year. That's a good chunk of change, isn't it? The VP tries to defend his position, but she does a good job, and I counter, but you could frame this as you've saved us $40 a year and created a baseline to judge expenses by. Cutting costs is always good for the bottom line and the end of the year bonuses, isn't it? FYI, I knew that a major percent of a VP comp package with the company had to do with the company's margin at the end of the year. The bigger the margin, the bigger the bonus. You can see the twinkle in his eye. We carry on the rest of the night. A few weeks later we get an email from the VP saying that we are submit to all our expenses directly to the admin for reimbursement, and that we have let go of Karen. FYI, Karen wasn't her real name, obviously. TL, Doctor got my translator fired for being difficult by getting the VP to see she was a waste of money. Sweet justice, and also without making yourself look petty. If anything, making themselves seem super invested in the business 10/10 to op. Good job framing it to the VP as cost savings, which it is, and appealing to his love of bonus money. Also, $3K translation fees for $3K of expenses is kind of nuts and probably the first thing that would be classified as cost cutting by any auditor. $30 to $300, okay. $3K. That makes no sense whatsoever. You got her, and you got her good. Kudos. $30 to $300, okay. $3K. That makes no sense. The time to translate that many receipts would be counted in hours, lol. Even if it was 10-cent transactions purchases on each receipt. Holy speep. Her entire job was based on a useless task and she wasn't smart enough to realize it. What an idiot. This will never happen after our computer overlords assume command. I mean, I have a degree in translation/interpretation and I can't for the life of me imagine translating receipts amounting to $3,000 a month would constitute a full-time job. Yeah, sounds like the expense fraud was perpetrated by the translator hired to prevent it. No, sounds like the whole story was an invention. I once had a consulting job in which I had to file expenses every month. If ever I missed a month due to work, I would have to do 2 months' worth of expenses, which meant a bunch of my receipts would start to fade, especially ones from those card terminals. Anyway, as per procedure, once my manager approved my expenses, which was never a problem, an accountant from finance team would process them. Most accountants were pretty chill about it and would process immediately, but there was this one accountant, Kevin, who would be anal about receipts being perfectly visible. He would cause me unnecessary trouble saying I would need to prepare an Excel sheet of expenses, which wasn't easy and frankly a complete waste of time. There was no business use of the spreadsheet. Kevin just wanted one for no reason. So eventually I made friends with one accountant who I basically told that I would directly send him my expenses. Problem solved. Later I heard Kevin had caused trouble to a bunch of people, and one of the senior execs blasted him on email. Hopefully he learned his lesson. I also have someone always questioning my receipts. I once was at a conference in Boston and instead of getting a cab from the airport to the conference hotel, I bought a week pass on the subway. It was significantly cheaper than one cab ride and I used it all week. I love the Science Museum and the New England Aquarium, so I visited them in my downtime. When I got back, she rejected my expenses and said it was missing cab fare and had the subway fare tagged as a bad expense. I had to go over her head to my director to get it approved. Apparently their expense report thing didn't have a drop-down for subway tickets or something. It was so embarrassing to get called out in front of my director for fraudulent expense reports that I never submit expenses anymore. I just make work pay for the travel and hotels ahead of time and any other expenses. I just claim the per diem. I was saving them money, but oh well. I once had a director ask why I had a 400/night hotel room in my expenses. She implied I was partying in luxury on the company's money. I told her it was a regular room in Boston. She insisted it was way too much, so I told her not to send me to Boston during the Democratic National Convention if she wanted me to have a cheap hotel. That seemed to take the wind out of her sails. Not only did you get her fired, you now are memorable to the VP. Hard to tell just from one story like this, but the way you wrote him, he doesn't seem the type to have it out for those under him because he fears for his own job security. Which means that you now have a credit of sorts with upper management. He'll remember you. If you need to bring up some issue, use that contact wisely and it can seriously help your career, or at least smooth over some rough edges in that particular job. Good job all around, I say. Based on this one story, VP seems like a bit of an idiot tbh. Op had to hold his hand and guide him to what really ought to have been an easy, obvious outcome. Im4. All VPs are morons. My boss is such an idiot. Most management is useless, etc. Also, yeah, I love this story. Definitely one of the best I've read on the sub. Never mess with a more talented bureaucramancer than yourself. They will use the system to get you. Bureaucramancer. I love this word. Gotta use it as soon as I finish my SAP rituals. I can't claim credit. It is a term I swiped from the Dresden Files books. Loved it and use it frequently. Beware the inkpot throne attack. That splash damage can be nightmarish. Well done, sir. Top quality reference. Well layered and no spoilers. My ex-wife is a translator. She would have never acted like this, Karen. She knows her job is to translate, not make or enforce policy. She might mention issues that she comes across, but she wouldn't be a bitch about it. I've seen her work with some documents in extremely bad condition, including bad scans, and she would do whatever she could to get the job done and only say something if it was simply impossible to read the document. Yeah, it's one of the cardinal rules of the field: never argue about the content you're translating. At most, you mention glaring errors and let the client deal with it. Hell, some would argue that you're not even supposed to bring up mistakes, because the purpose of translation is to be faithful to the original. Either way, that translator was incredibly unprofessional. I wish Nintendo Treehouse knew that. Always funny when people think they have any power without actually bringing any benefit to the company. I once had an entire team disband this way. Not fired, just assigned different tasks. In my previous job, I developed and maintained telecom invoice software for large customers. The idea was that my company would pay local telecom suppliers in the countries our big international customers were active, and then bill the customers for their telecom. This way, the customer would receive one big invoice, instead of a separate invoice for each country they were in. In order to create these invoices, we would process data from the local vendors through the software we created. In the beginning, There was a lot of things that were unbillable due to the system not knowing how to charge it. So a team was created to manually go over the issues and decide how to bill them. After a few months and many tweaks to the software, the obvious and recurring solutions were put into code, and all we were left with was the really exceptional cases. At a certain point, I started monitoring how much money we actually billed additionally thanks to the efforts of that team, because the weekly meetings were becoming a drag. One day, we had a meeting for an hour with 4 people and in the end managed to bill something like 17 extra. After talking to my manager about it, that marked the last time we had that meeting and all team members were assigned to different projects. Holy crap, hiring her in the first place was a ridiculous idea. I've worked in accounting departments. When we get a foreign receipt, we use Google Translate. Easy breezy, that's all there is to it. I scrolled way too far to find this. If they were constantly translating from the same language to English, all they'd need would be to look up the word one time. Say they're in Poland. Drukarki is used pretty interchangeably as printer or copier. It's office expenses. Copy, paper and ink have to be the most common line item. Except maybe coffee. Your company still need a receipts translator? It'll take 1/3 what your VP pay her. /S. One, our admin people speaks the language, and part of their job is to read the receipts. Don't think they translate it, just read them and make sure it says what it's supposed to say. It's also not their only duty, they do other stuff too. The translator would have only made sense if you already had one on staff. Basically how we do it now. We have a secretary that does a lot of different stuff. And one of the requirements is they are bilingual and check the receipts as a part of one of her roles. Yeah, makes more sense. Just gotta make sure none of those receipts don't say something like 300 happy ending parlor lol. Y'all must have some classy high-end rub and tugs if it's 300 a visit, let alone a place that gives out receipts. Well, business expense, right? You gotta treat your clients too, not just yourself. Ah. So you're not even getting that bring a friend discount. Getting robbed, bro.